I got thinking about this crazy trip I took with my brother Kevin to Mexico in 1983. He was 16, I was 17. It was a motorcycle trip and we got lost in the desert. All right, so this was April of 1983 and I was a senior in high school. Kevin was a junior. Even though we were a year apart, we didn't hang out all that much. We'd eat lunch together sometimes, but we had different friends. I was still trying to figure out the social scene in high school. He had friends outside of high school, mostly older people that were into riding motorcycles, and Kevin was really into that. So he raced motocross and did enduro races. Motorcycling was like a big thing for him and he was really good at it. I liked motorcycle riding too. I would just kind of putt around and enjoy just being out there, but I didn't do anything fancy at all. I was always kind of cautious. All right, so Kevin used to read Dirt Bike magazine, and in the back of the magazine there was this advertisement for this trail ride in Baja California, leaving from Ensenada, going out to this remote location called Mike's Sky Rancho. Can I pronounce this? In the Sierra de Juarez Mountains. Did I pronounce that correctly? Sierra de Juarez. All right, so I kind of heard that my dad and Kevin were going to be taking this motorcycle trip to Mexico. I didn't really know any details. Well, about 2 days before the trip was to take place, my dad got sick. So that was a real problem. Like, Kevin's not going to go on this trip at 16 years old, drive 580 miles across the Mexican border into Ensenada and do this trip by himself. It was talked about and decided that, oh yeah, maybe Mike will go with him. And I was like, Mexico? Yeah, I'll go. Do I need to bring a tennis racket? What's the place? Where are we staying? He's like, they have a pool. And I was like, okay, sounds good to me. All right, so the plan was we leave Thursday after school. So that's what we did. We got home Thursday. I guess we'd had the bikes already on the trailer. I was gonna be riding an old XR 200. It was only 2 years old, but it had been ridden hard. So the bikes were loaded up and we took off. I think we took Highway 5, so nothing exciting. But we got into San Diego, like northern San Diego, at around midnight. Back in those days, you just had to drive around until you saw a hotel or whatever. There was no way to look online. You couldn't check on your phone. So we just pulled off the highway and we saw, you know, vacancy. We ended up waking up the guy and he's like half asleep. He's like, yeah, okay, you can stay upstairs. After driving 8 hours, we were exhausted. I think it's close to 500 miles. We went into this room and unfortunately, like one of the beds had already was slept in. So the covers were turned back. I don't remember who took that bed, but we just both decided, let's just sleep with our clothes on. So we just slept in our clothes. So I went into the bathroom to brush my teeth and the sink was kind of hanging off the wall, like the bolts were not tight enough. The next day we woke up and decided we're gonna go get breakfast and then make the trip crossing the border into Mexico down to Ensenada, which was about probably, I think it's about 80 miles south of Tijuana. We went to a Denny's and I remember I remember ordering, like my go-to breakfast was like pancakes. So I remember sitting, eating pancakes, and we parked my dad's Oldsmobile like right outside the window so we could see the motorcycles because we were just afraid that somebody might steal them. And I remember we had a waitress came up and she was not that much older than us, maybe early 20s. And she was just like, kind of like, wow, what are you guys doing? You know, you're not in school and it's like a weekday. And she was kind of curious, like, what are you guys up to? And we were like, oh, we're going down to Mexico to ride motorcycles. Okay, that's kind of sketchy. She's like, oh, really? Okay, well, be careful and have fun. She was very sweet. So driving across the border was like, it was a huge eye-opening experience. And like, for example, so you know, immediately you're on these sort of busy, crazy roads and the signs obviously are all in Spanish. And then there's signs for like bullfighting and high life. 15 minutes before you're in San Diego County or whatever. And now you're in this different country that is so different. And so we had to make our way through Tijuana to get to Highway 1 going south to Ensenada. But getting through Tijuana was not easy. In fact, I remember at one point, I'm trying to figure out which way to turn. And again, guys, there's no mapping on your phone. We're trying to read a map and figure this out. And what happened was, I remember some guy is like waving, you know, and pointing. And I'm like, oh, wow, well, that's nice, you know. Not thinking like, how does he know where we're going? I'm thinking he's trying to help us out. And so I start turning and Kev's like, he's like, no, 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 no. And I'm like, whoa, what? And he's like, that's an upholstery shop. So the guy was like trying to wave us into his upholstery shop. Hey Dad, what do you think of the new interior? All right, so we finally found our way to Highway 1, and I remember it was like such a relief, but it was an eye-opener too, because, you know, I'd seen houses that were sort of built out of scraps of plywood and old tires. There was a lot of buildings made out of old tires. This was south of Tijuana. And anyway, but there was something really kind of beautiful about it down there too, that I liked it immediately. Anyway, so as we're riding along on Highway 1, I was like, wow, this road is actually pretty nice. This is cool. But then at some point, it just turned into dirt for like a mile, and then it became a highway again, just a 2-lane highway. Once we got through Tijuana, we got down to Ensenada. That trip down was kind of uneventful, but again, I was really struck by the beauty of the place, and it was kind of wild, and I just thought it was really cool. So we get down to the Hotel Presidente, and you know, I don't know what my expectations were, but I was thinking more resort-like. This was kind of Wild West in a way. I mean, it was definitely in the sort of Spanish or Mexican style, and it had like a courtyard, and there was a pool in the courtyard, and it looked like the place had maybe been built in the 50s, and it was, you know, big sort of terracotta tiles on the floor, all very worn, and then kind of what do you call it, mission style or ranch style furniture there was like kind of a restaurant downstairs, but old, very old and kind of rustic. I liked it immediately, and it was a cool kind of vibe. It almost felt like you were in some, I don't know, just such a faraway place, you know? And so I was tired and decided to go upstairs and take a nap. And I remember like waking up to the sound, like it was probably 4 in the afternoon. I remember waking up to the sound of a mariachi band down playing in the courtyard, and I walked out, and it was sort of a balcony. I looked down, and I could see there were some Americans down there, sort of like Americans that were in the know, that discovered this was this cool place that you could get away from, like say San Diego or Los Angeles, in a couple hours drive. You could be down in this place that was so different and so peaceful in a way. It was very quiet. The town was very small at that point. In 1983, I don't know what it's like now, but it seemed very undeveloped and kind of, like I said, very remote. So anyway, I loved it. I loved the sound of the music, and so then Kev came back to the room, and we decided to go out and get some, like, just go to like a little general store and pick something up for maybe some snack or whatever. So we walked down to some little store, and then I remember we bought sodas, and they were different. Like there was one called Sangria. It was like, I thought that was wine, but no, it was like a fruit soda kind of thing. And then also they had Squirt, which I'd never seen before, Squirt soda. And we got that too, and probably some other junk food. But anyhow, so I was really digging this so far, you know. I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. So we had the meeting, the dinner, you know, and the guy Fred Chase, we met him, met all the other bikers. And what I noticed was most of the motorcyclers were older. Like most of them were, I'd say they were in their 30s and 40s. They were mostly older. We were like, there was maybe one other young guy, he was maybe 20. And then there was a dad who had 2 young kids, but other than that, it was mostly an older crowd. So everybody met, and they talked about what we were gonna do. Like the plan was we'd wake up the next morning, leave early, and we'd ride 120 miles out to a place called Sky Rancho, which was like some little hotel, if you call it that, in the mountains in northern Baja there. So anyway, so we went to bed, and the next day woke up early. And I remember, you know, just getting the bikes ready. We had some breakfast. We had a quick breakfast, and then, you know, kick-started the bikes, and 25 motorcycles rode through Ensenada out to start the ride. And I just remember, and I talked to Kev about this because I called him, and I wanted to make sure I remembered correctly. And it was interesting because he said to me, he goes, man, it was like, he goes, it was such a cool thing, like 25 dirt bikes riding down the streets of Ensenada. And I remembered the same thing. We didn't talk about it, but it was like, you know, at home, you could barely ride a motorcycle, like a dirt bike, anywhere. There were such strict, you know, sort of rules about it. And here there were 25 of us riding through the streets of downtown Ensenada, and it was just in the like early morning light, and there was a light rain and everything, and it was just kind of like, wow, this is like something out of a movie or something. It just seemed so cool. And I just remember how clumsy I was with like shifting and the controls and everything. I was not a good, I was like, oh wow, okay, well, just take my time and I'm sure I'll figure this out. So we rode about a mile, and then we just made a left-hand turn off into these trails. It had been raining, it was cold, and the trails were a mess. It was like mud. And so almost immediately bikes started getting stuck and bogged down. And so within an hour, like several people turned back. The guy who had small children, he decided, okay, this is it. We're going back. We're not, so he took his kids and that was it. So I think maybe lost one other person. But I managed to get through that. I don't know how, just took my time. I did fall over, I think once or twice, but didn't get really hurt. I do remember the bike hitting my leg, and it kind of hurt for a while, like as I fell over, but I managed to get through. And then we got through the bog, the mud, and then it kind of opened up and just sort of started getting like kind of rocky but sandy areas. And I was like, all right, kind of feeling that, but I was slow. So I was kind of pushing it to keep up with the pack because I didn't have as much experience, and these guys were out there to have fun. And I remember just kind of pushing, riding above my head, as they call it. I was pushing a little too hard, and I did not see this dry creek bed, and so I'm cruising along, and all of a sudden I dip into this creek bed and come out the other side, and I'm like riding a wheelie out the other side, and just like I'm in a panic, man, because I'm almost about to lose it. Somehow, by some miracle, the bike comes back down and I ride it out, and some dude like zooms by me with the thumb up, like, yeah, right on, dude. And I was like, you have no idea. That was like so unintentional. But anyway, I mean, I'm surprised it even looked good. I would have imagined it would have looked like somebody trying to hold on, like riding a bull or something. I was completely out of control. But anyway, so at that point I decided, that scared me, because I was like, if I go down out here and get hurt, where's the medical help? Like, what? I don't even know. This area is so remote. Anyway, so I decided, okay, I'm just gonna be careful. So most of that day I was riding by myself, and I was trying to find the trail, and most of the time it was easy. It got difficult to find the trail when I got to the sand, and riding in sand is really difficult, and the only way to ride in sand is to keep up a lot of speed. It's almost like water skiing in a way. If you don't have enough speed, you don't stay up. So most of that day I was just trying to find the trail. We met up with the truck and had our lunch, and then we made it to Mike's Sky Rancho about the time that it was getting dark, and they had some dinner, which I was starving, and I just remember the dinner was not quite enough. But basically everyone was exhausted. The idea was we were going to wake up and have breakfast and then ride back by a different route and get back to Ensenada on Sunday evening. So we were all packed into these tiny rooms, and it was 4 to a room, where normally the rooms are set up for like maybe 2, but they had jammed a bunch of beds in there, to the point where I remember the room we were in, there were 4 of us in there, and I do not remember any floor space because there were just beds in there. You kind of had to like climb over the beds to get to other beds. Anyway, we had these 2 roommates, and I don't remember their names, but they were older guys. They were in their late 30s. They were really cool guys. And so we all pretty much passed out. I was exhausted and did not know how I was going to ride the next day. So basically we rode for almost 12 hours and did 120 miles. And this was grueling trail riding with, in rainy conditions, being wet. I was wearing like Levi jeans. Kev was wearing jeans. We were just not prepared for that kind of weather. And even though it was like April, it was cold. It was really cold, especially when you're wet and you're riding along. So anyway, we went to sleep, passed out. Next day we wake up, and the breakfast was powdered eggs. I remember that. It was like scrambled eggs, but they were powdered eggs, not particularly good. And then just like white bread toast or whatever. I just remember it being really, not very substantial. Anyway, so then we went out, we kick-started our bikes, and off we go. Now, what happened was, right off the bat, you have to ride through a river so you know, literally leaving Mike's Sky Rancho, you've got to ride through this river. Most of the guys who rode through the river would put their legs up and ride through, but I didn't want to take my feet off the pegs because I thought I would just lose it. So when I rode through, my pants got soaked. So here it was, literally like 2 minutes into the ride and I'm already soaking wet. Fortunately, this day the weather was a little bit better. I was kind of the last to come through, and there were some of the other riders waiting for me and watching. And I don't know, like one of the older riders looked down at my bike and he looked at my chain and he's like, "You got a sloppy chain, man." He goes, "You got to fix that." You know, he goes, "Man, I can't believe you'd come out on a ride like this with a chain like that." And I'm like, I don't know, you know? And so these guys like got their tools out and they're trying to like loosen up the back wheel and pull it so that it tightens the chain. So they pull the back wheel as far as it'll go and the chain is still loose. And then they look at the back sprocket and they're like, "There's barely any teeth on your sprocket." And they're just like, "I can't believe you would come on a trip like this with a bike in this condition." I'm like, okay, great. I don't know that much about motorcycles. Like, I just got into this 2 days ago, man. I don't know what's going on. But these dudes, you know, even though they were pissed off, I gotta credit them. They actually got their tools out. They took links out of my chain to tighten it up. So they kind of fixed things up, and then we went on our way. So we ride for several hours, and we're definitely getting hungry. It's getting to be about lunchtime, and it starts becoming clear that Fred Chase, the guy who is leading the tour, is kind of confused about where we are. We're kind of riding back and forth, and everybody's kind of talking, like, what are we doing? Like, what's going on? Where are we? Where's the chase truck? What's happening? Some people are starting to get low on fuel. And then Fred kind of confesses that he doesn't recognize the trail. He's not sure exactly where we are because it's looking very much like desert. There's a lot of sand and like shrubs, but there's not a lot of, we should be in the mountains. And somehow he starts trying to figure out, well, where are we? Well, we do a lot of riding back and forth, and we're going further and further north because he's looking for a trail to get through the mountains somehow. And so I remember stopping at one point, and we're all just kind of sitting around waiting to see what's going on, and it's getting serious. Some of the bikes have already run out of gas, and there are others that have broken down. There was one bike that kept repeatedly getting flats. And so bikes would get left in the desert and then people would double up. So some people now are riding with like somebody on the back, like they're riding double through difficult conditions. Another guy sort of flew off his bike and they say shattered a cactus with his ass or his rear end. It tore open the back end of his pants and his butt was like already getting really swollen, and to cover it up, he just covered it up with a windbreaker and then rode the rest of the ride side saddle. But you could see he was concerned. So basically at this point, we've been riding probably, I don't know, at least 5 hours, and it was becoming clear that, you know, there were some injuries, some lost bikes, and then also we were lost, and the morale was definitely dipping. People were not happy and getting frustrated. And worried, frankly. And I think that Fred kind of felt that heat. Anyway, he breaks out this big bag of trail mix and knows that everybody's hungry, so he gives us all this trail mix, and we devour this bag of trail mix. And then we just sit and wait, and he's looking at his maps, trying to figure out what's going on. And then at some point in the distance, he sees like this pickup truck out in the desert. So he gets on his bike and he cruises over there. Maybe a few of the other bikers go with him, and then they come back and they say, okay, we're on the wrong side of the mountain range. We've got to get to the other side. But basically these ranchers told him, they're like, you got to go to San Felipe because you guys are never going to make it. You don't have enough gas. There's no way you're going to get to Ensenada. You guys have gone so far off trail. You're so far north that you've got to get gas. So they gave us some gas, and then they said, you got to just head east until you hit Federal Highway 5. And we could look off to the east and you could see nothing but just dry lake bed that seemed like it went on forever. So, but basically that was the deal. So we all got on our bikes, and like I said, there was one guy that actually ran out of gas, and another guy that's bike had seized or something, and he had it in neutral, and we were towing bikes with ropes. So we're blasting across this lake bed. That was another cinematic moment, you know, all these dirt bikes riding across this immense flat sort of expanse with the dust clouds coming up behind it. It was really pretty spectacular, but still at the same time, just, you know, exhausted and hungry and concerned. So we finally make it to Federal Highway 5, which was probably, I don't know if it was an 8-mile ride across this lake bed. Any case, we get to Federal Highway 5 and flag down an RV that's towing some ATV, like some, you know, 4-wheel quad like type things or whatever. Bumped some gasoline off of them and kind of asked where we were, and they said, oh yeah, okay, you want to head south. So basically we had quite a long trip back to Ensenada by road, and that's what we were going to do. It was already starting to get dark, so we got on Federal Highway 5, started heading south. And we found this little sort of roadside gas station in a place called La Ventana. So we pulled over there, we got gas as much as we could, and they had a few candy bars, so we bought them, and then we got back on the road. Now at this point it was dark, and here we were, not all these were dirt bikes, so they didn't have headlights. There were only a couple of us that had headlights. Kevin and I had enduro bikes, so they had headlights on them. So we were up front, and then people would ride in the light that we illuminated. Some in front of us, some behind us. There were a few other bikes that had it as well. But I remember this 20-year-old guy who refused to leave his bike out in the desert because he knew that he was not going to go back and get it. And he was like, you guys got to tow me. So I just remember cruising along, and it's pitch black out there because it's desert, there's no light. But you've got to give lead time. You can't be towing somebody at 50 miles an hour and having them only a few feet behind you. So he had this long rope, and he was being towed like probably 20 feet, 25 feet behind another motorcycle. And he was almost in the total darkness back there. So just really sketchy. Anyway, so then we're starting to run low on gas again, and we pull over at some little shack, and we wake this guy up. It's kind of like a little farm shack. Wake this guy up, and he was really nice, and he was like kind of a farmer, and he had a flatbed truck with some wooden slats on the side. By this point, I've been shivering for the last 2 hours because all I have is a sweatshirt, and it's so cold at night in the desert. And I say to Fred Chase, I'm like, I can't ride anymore, man. I'm, you know, can I put my bike in the trailer too? I just want to, you know, and I wanted to get in that truck in the worst way. I was exhausted, hungry. We never met the truck that had our lunch because we didn't go to the rendezvous point. We were completely lost. So the truck just went back to Ensenada. We had no food, very little water. My bike was operable, so I was not allowed in the truck. I had to ride. All right, so we kept riding, and at this point, I remember being delirious and almost hallucinating. And it was interesting because when I talked to Kevin about this later, last night I called him and I wanted to kind of see if my memories connected with his and see if we could figure out what happened, where we went. In any case, that last ride back to Ensenada, you know, those last 3 hours or so, I remember having like strange sort of thoughts going through my head. I was almost in a half-conscious state. And I remember thinking about, this is really random, I remember feeling like I was in, like, I kept imagining I was in a Leave It to Beaver episode, and I was like talking to Beaver, and I was talking to Wally, his older brother. I know it's very weird. And Kev said he was having hallucinations too. And he said that he felt like when he was riding that these little creatures, like little mice or rats, were running out into the road, and that the bikes in front were flinging them up and they were hitting him in the body. And he's like, did that happen to you, or did I imagine it? Was I just hallucinating? I was riding right next to him, and I didn't notice any rats or any creatures, and I certainly didn't get hit by any, so it's a good chance he was hallucinating too. So that last stretch, now at this point on the road, I think there were less than a dozen bikes left, so more than half had been, you know, didn't make it. And about 2 a.m. we pulled into Ensenada, and the chase vehicle, the van with the lunch and everything, was waiting outside. Man, and they had like a barrel full of apples floating in cold water, and these sandwiches, which were probably just like, I think they were like bologna sandwiches or something, with American cheese on some sort of white bread, probably Wonder Bread. Anyway, I devoured, I mean, that apple, I've never had such a good apple. And so we devoured the food, and it was just such a relief to be back. We had ridden a total of almost 400 miles in those 2 days. That's like riding from San Francisco to Los Angeles on rugged, dirt, mountainous, sandy trails. That's crazy. And so anyway, by 3 a.m. we were just passed out in our room. And I won't say that the sleep that I had was like necessarily a good sleep, because I was not comfortable. My shoulders and my back were so sore from shivering that it was just kind of a fitful sleep, and your head, when you're that exhausted and that fatigued, it's almost impossible to get a really restful night's sleep. So the next day we wake up, and the idea is we're going to drive home in two segments from Ensenada, kind of drive maybe somewhere, maybe Santa Barbara, sleep overnight, and then go back to the Bay Area. Now, during this time, I don't think we ever talked to my parents. So we left the Bay Area on a Thursday afternoon to Mexico, and because there was really no way to communicate, I mean, I suppose we could have called on payphones, but I don't think we did. I'm still surprised that my parents, maybe they were just as ignorant as I was about this, about what we really were getting into. In any case, so yeah, we woke up the next day and we started driving, and we pretty much just decided, let's just go home. We're gonna go all the way home. So we drove all that day, and I remember it was really late, and we were out on Highway 5. It had gotten dark. And again, it's probably about 500, almost 600 miles to the Bay Area to get to home from Ensenada. So it's a long drive. Anyway, by the time we got going and whatever, because we had trouble waking up, and probably left at checkout probably around noon. So anyway, by the time we got home to the Bay Area, it was like 1 in the morning. But on Highway 5, Kevin and I were so exhausted, we found a way to actually switch drivers when we were cruising at full speed down the freeway. So we would take turns, like sleeping an hour on, hour off. Like he would go into the back seat and just crash out, and then I would watch my watch and it'd be like, okay dude, it's your time. Then he'd climb over into the front seat, and somehow we'd like swap driving while just continuing to go on the freeway. And because it was like the front seat was kind of a bench seat, so you could do that. Anyway, so we get home about 1 in the morning, and I remember we don't have a key to the house. So we go around, and we remember there's like this window in the back in the kitchen that doesn't lock. So we go around to the back deck and then slide open the window and reach in, you know, to like move the curtain so we could climb in up onto the countertop and get into the kitchen. And at which point we hear a man's voice scream, "Hey!" We both were like freaked out, and then we knew it was my dad. We just freaked out. Dad, he doesn't know we're coming home, and he thinks somebody's breaking into the house. And so we both were like, "Dad, it's us." And he was like, "Oh my God, you guys, I thought somebody was coming in the house and I could scare him off or whatever." Anyway, so that I believe was like Monday night. I don't think I went to school the next day, but by the time I went back to school, which was like probably Wednesday, I remember people in school, you know, and it was a beautiful day. Here it is May, early May, and I remember it being a sunny, nice day, going back to school and in the hallways, and somebody said, "Oh yeah, Mike, where you been, man? You missed a few days or whatever." And I just remember thinking, to them it was a few days. I felt like I had been on some epic journey, some life-altering experience, and it was so compressed in such a short period of time. It was like, it blew me away. Like I could have been at home doing nothing, you know? It was such a short period of time for them, but yet for me, it was like this journey that seemed a lot more than a couple days, that's for sure. Anyway, so that's pretty much my Mexico story. Still kind of surprised like that, and I'll have to talk to my parents about that. I don't think they really remember very much about it. But Kevin and I had a good talk about it, and it is sort of amazing that at 16 and 17 years old, we were able to go on this crazy motorcycle trip unchaperoned in Mexico in 1983. But I'm glad that we went, and I'll never forget this. I'll never forget that journey. It was pretty amazing. The other thing too that I felt, I'm kind of proud of myself, or it was a confidence builder, you know? I mean, I think in high school, I struggled maybe with confidence and being accepted and part of the crowd and everything. But you do something like that, especially, you know, I was riding with seasoned riders, and half of them didn't make it. And so, and I made it, you know, and I felt proud of that afterwards. Like, wow, you know, I actually did that. And I think I was talking to him on the phone too, and Kev was saying, like, in certain parts when he didn't know where I was, but he was riding, he's like, God, I hope Mike makes it through this. This is pretty technical stuff here, you know? And I never thought of it that way because I didn't know what was technical and what wasn't. It all just seemed kind of hard to me, you know, and I was just trying to figure it out. But yeah, I was just happy that I made it. And it was kind of a cool moment, you know, and it's something that, you know, Kevin and I will never forget. Definitely an adventure for sure. So anyway, hope you found this enjoyable and interesting, entertaining, or whatever. Have you ever gone on crazy life-altering journeys? Let me know in the comments below. But as usual, thanks for hanging out, guys. I will see you in the next video.